Hey everyone, this is Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to Untold Stories. This is a show where we dive deep into the lives and personal histories of some of crypto's most influential leaders and find out how the crypto movement truly came to be. Let's dive in. On the show today, we had a phenomenal episode talking to Jeff Garzik. If you've never heard of Jeff, well, then you've been living under a rock for ever, because he's one of the most well-known people in the Bitcoin space and now the crypto space as the founder and CEO of Bloq, B-L-O-Q. But Jeff is not just involved in Bloq, he's been involved in the space even before me, going back to 2010. He worked very, very closely with Satoshi himself, and we talked about that. We talked about how they had a lot of conversations, and Satoshi even rejected some code that Jeff eventually had written. And we used that conversation to segue into different topics like SegWit2x, Lightning, Bitcoin Foundation type stuff, really the early days of Bitcoin. And we talked about some of the newer different topics like self-censorship and tribalism, and how he doesn't get jaded and how trolling really brushes him off, because he worked at CNN in the mid-90s helping bring CNN's website online. He was, CNN.com, he was one of the people that did that. And then he worked for Red Hat for, 11 years, directly under the founder of Linux, Linus Torvald, building out technology. And if you're using an Android phone today, there's a good chance that software that Jeff has written over 10 years ago is in your phone still till today. So we talked about the different comparisons of early technology of that versus early technology of Bitcoin today, and using a lot of comparisons and contrasting that as well. Such a great episode. I didn't realize that the timing actually went over. We went over the time that I normally do. So this is going to be a great episode. I'll talk to you guys right after the ad. Stay tuned. I'm so honored that Untold Stories is sponsored by eToro. eToro is the smartest crypto trading platform and one of the largest in the world, with over $1 trillion in trading volume per year. What I really love about eToro is that the CEO has been around the Bitcoin space since 2012, so they really put their money where their mouths are. US customers, myself included, we can trade the most popular crypto assets, in fact, almost all of the ones that you want to trade, with low but transparent fees. So you actually know what you're paying for everything. And that's really important. So if you're not ready to trade yet, you can practice building your portfolio with the eToro $100,000 virtual trading feature. So you can create this whole portfolio without trading with any real money to see how you'll do. And you can learn all the different ins and outs without using any real money yet. And then once you're comfortable, you can enter the market and start buying and selling crypto for real. Best of all, one of my favorite features is that you can connect with 11 million other eToro traders in the world, myself included. And we can talk trading, charts, and all things crypto. So listen, head on over to eToro.com, links are in the show notes, and build your crypto portfolio the smart way. Untold Stories wouldn't be here without the amazing production company Blockworks Group. A few months ago, I approached Blockworks Group and I said, hey guys, I want to do a show, Untold Stories. Can we make it happen? And these guys are the only event and podcast production company that I trust. Really, the show is powered by them, and it wouldn't be here today without the amazing work of the Blockworks Group team. So for access to all the premier digital asset conferences and to check out their other podcasts in their network that they produce, check them out at blockworksgroup.io. That's blockworksgroup.io. I promise you will not be disappointed. Today our guest is one of the most famous people and one of my favorite people, and someone that I can call a good friend of mine, Jeff Garzik. Jeff, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Charlie. It's been quite a while.
It's been too long. Usually, I'll do an intro about who this person is, why are they important, why am I talking to them, and I'll probably record something prior. But I don't think you need an introduction, and I think that the listeners who don't know you will learn about who you are as the show progresses. And I'm really excited to talk to you today because we started talking before the show started, and we talked about BitPay. BitPay is one of our sponsors at Untold Stories, and we're talking, and I said how I'm going to go be visiting BitPay's offices in a month or so, and how you live in Georgia as well, and hopefully we can meet up. But it was interesting what I said and how you kind of agreed with me. I said how I like visiting, offices of companies, especially companies in the Bitcoin space and the crypto space that just been around such a long time. And BitPay is probably one of the oldest and longest running companies in the space, simply because when I go to their office and, I talk to the staff and we have lunch with them, and it's not just them, it's any company. Whenever I'm meeting it kind of reminds us why we're here. Do you feel that? Because you've been involved in multiple different technologies. I mean, you ride if there was someone who told me, like, who is there in the most important technologies that we've had in the world in the past 30 years, you were there with not just Bitcoin, but with also the internet and moving, working at CNN and moving them onto the internet, their first website, which was super interesting. But I mean, you kind of agreed with me as soon as I said that. Do you feel the same way when you meet with certain companies and people? But I guess you probably feel differently with other people and companies too. I know I do. There are some companies and people I simply don't want to talk to because, I don't like how they are online. I don't like toxicity like that. Do you kind of feel that same way?
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me. BitPay in particular, I'm certainly quite biased in that I used to work for BitPay. Big fan of them. I think they're lifers like me. And so I certainly get that feeling when I talk to Stephen and Tony and visit their offices myself, is that they're thinking about how do we build the crypto economy? How do we integrate this technology into everybody's lives? They're stealing a term from the Linux community, plumbers. They really like to look at the stuff that maybe other people are kind of bored with, infrastructure, plumbing, the low level stuff. But that's what it takes to get payments working. If you go to the United Way website and you want to make a donation, something like that, you're going to get redirected to BitPay. And they were, I think still are the biggest payment processor and one of the biggest gateways for normal everyday folks having their first touch of crypto. That's their experience. And they've been at it for maybe 8 years now, I think my calendar says. There are so many alumni from BitPay out there in the world. For example, my company Bloq, we hire Argentinians among other people around the world. And there's a big ex-BitPay Argentinian contingent down there. They're all Bitcoin believers. And it really does take you back to those first days of Bitcoin and thinking, pounding the pavement, as I literally did, looking for Bitcoin merchants to onboard and use this newfangled digital currency. There's so many people that were touched by BitPay and some of these other old school companies. They're still around, still believers, still working at it. And it just definitely takes me back and reminds me why we're working on all this.
You love infrastructure. You get very excited about it. And no, it's a good thing because, we need people like you. And it's not just with Bitcoin. It's with, you worked 10 years directly under Linus Torvalds and on the Linux kernel. And a lot of your work is on almost all Android phones today that we were talking about earlier. So that excites you. I guess my question is, why is that? I was going to phrase it like more, like complicated.
Yeah. That's a tough question to answer. It's both simple
everyone gets excited
and
about different things. Everyone gets excited about different aspects. I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember you, me, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, were sitting in a bar.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We sat in a bar in Buenos Aires. I think it was like 2012 or 2013 or 2012. And you were like, Charlie, I'm going to freaking launch Bitcoin into space. I'm going to launch a satellite, a CubeSat. And I thought it was brilliant. And yeah, I love space like everyone else.
And
but
admit it, you thought it was a little crazy
well,
too.
so like my girlfriend at the time, she like turns to me after and she's like, what was that? Who is this guy? I was like, I don't know, but he's brilliant, but I don't know what he's doing sending Bitcoin to space. Like, I don't know, but you got to just, he's the type of guy that's going to say yes and do it. And you really did, like, you put the concept of Bitcoin in space and you're still working on it in the minds of a lot of people. And I know people who have launched, coins off of your blockchain post. Like, I know someone launched Mars coin that's been around for like 6 years because of that post that you made on Bitcoin Talk. It really got everyone excited about Bitcoin in space. And then Blockstream launched their thing, which was, they just rented a direct TV satellite. So are you still trying to get Bitcoin into space?
Absolutely. And it's really that love of infrastructure. I've, taking a step back sort of on a high level, I really am a big fan of science fiction. And I immediately in 2010, when I first found Bitcoin, I jumped on it because it was something that I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for Bitcoin when it came along in July of 2010. That's when I first noticed it. I've been thinking about stuff like Bitcoin, wanting something like that for almost a decade at that point. And it's a staple of science fiction, having all this, having a digital currency, a modern currency. And it's something that you could pass, $1 million worth of cash to someone else by simply handing them a USB flash drive, that sort of thing. And so that was the vision of the future that I grew up on. And I was always the impatient sort, wondering, well, why don't we have this decentralized digital currency yet? Why don't we have nodes in space and settlements in space and all the Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke fiction that I grew up on? Why isn't that there? We went to the moon. We went to U.S. went in the Apollo missions, went to the moon, and then we never went back. And why
did we never go back to the moon? I never really understood that.
Yeah, it's politics, cost. Good old Senator Richard Shelby in Alabama loves spending money more than he likes actually doing stuff. But I think that's a whole nother podcast. But I always saw myself as a plumber and looked at how can I get involved in that infrastructure in such a way that I can affect positive change. I can be part of the journey and also be part of that uplift to get us closer to the future. And that's how I found Bitcoin. I found it off a post on a website, slash.org, the tagline News for Nerds. I call it the great slash dotting kind of in retrospect because several other Bitcoin developers and enthusiasts other than myself found it in that one post. Jed McCaleb of Mt. Gox, notably.
Did you know that, and I want to ask you the same question, almost everyone I speak to, and this is myself included, and this is even true today, most people I ask this question, like, how do you find, I don't like asking that question, it's a stupid question, but unless there's a great answer. But you know that everyone always answers with like the same answer. That I saw Bitcoin at first here, I read about it, I ignored it, and then I saw it again here. So was that the same for you? Because for me, it was. That slash dot was the first one.
No, I dove in that night. I sent my first post, my first patch to Satoshi within 24 hours of that post. It hit every, ticked every checkbox, hit every groove for me. It was like Linux in that it's an open source project. And it was very much a meritocracy. It was not about, who is this weird Satoshi? What's his resume? What are his qualifications? The greatness of his anonymity was that you had to focus on the code because you didn't know who it was. And
what was that first message you sent to him, though?
It was
like, walk me through those first conversations. Satoshi is so mysterious to most of us. There are very few people that corresponded with him. I only corresponded in a larger setting, never privately. So, like, what was that like? I mean, what was going on in your head as you were messaging? Did you think anything? Did you when you're emailing someone, you're always going to Google that person and who is this person? What does their face look like? Based on their email responses, you can figure out, like, demographics, where are they from, who are they, how do they write, formatting, like how do you format an email, the font, the color, all this stuff we're always thinking about. Did you think about these things in those first messages?
No, it was all about importing my Linux experience, which is it's all done through email. So no face-to-face, no video chat, no multimedia. It's just text and patches. And patches are how programmers talk to each other. A patch is another word is a software change or a diff. And in Linux, every single day I sit there and email patches to Linus Torvalds, the inventor of Linux. He evaluates them and says, oh, yeah, thumbs up, we'll include that in the software, or thumbs down, we're not including that in the software. And I took the exact same tack with Satoshi. It wasn't like, hi, my name is Jeff, here's my background, da-da-da-da. It was, hi, I'd like to include this change in Bitcoin, and here's a patch to do it. Because that's how programmers talk to each other. It's less about what English we write, and it's what changes are we proposing to the software. And he, famously, I like to say, rejected the patch. I forget what was the reason. But that's the natural open source process of, if you get a thumbs down, then you either say, okay, this approach was wrong, let me revisit my approach, or, oh, there's just a bug in my change and I need to fix that bug and then send the change back up. And that's what I did. He included it in the Bitcoin software. And there wasn't just a ton of back and forth philosophical conversation.
This was 2011 or 2010?
This was 2010, July of 2010.
Okay.
Right after that Slashdot post, within a 24 to 48 hours.
Wow. I
was mining and sending patches within 24 to 48 hours.
I remember those days everyone was mining because all you had to do was run the software. So I remember opening up my MacBook and mining. I think it was like I got, over the course of a day or two, it was like 50 Bitcoin. And then I sent it to a friend of mine, and we were literally sitting next to each other. Like my friend Joe, we were sitting. I was sitting on his couch. I'll never forget this. And I was like, "Hey, dude, I was just fucking around. You're fucking around. You're kid. We're kids. I was 20 years old, and I was like, check out this stupid Bitcoin thing. He's like, oh, what's that? I was like, downloadable version of PayPal. He's like, I don't give a shit. Pass me the bong or whatever. And then I was like, no, dude, check this out. This is really cool because, I was like, check this out. It's really cool because, like, look at this data file. It's on your computer, and I didn't really fully understand it, so I was kind of like making it up as I go because I didn't come from like a super technology background, so I didn't fully understand it, but I was excited about it because I knew something to be excited about, and you probably understand that.
Yeah, you could know that it was something to be excited about.
Yeah, exactly. And I sent him the 50 Bitcoin. I was like, check this out. I remember it was blockchain.info. No, there was a Block Explorer before blockchain. I think it was like blockexplorer.com. I forget.
Yeah, that was it. It was run by Thamos, who runs the Bitcoin Talk
Whatever
forums.
happened to that Block Explorer? I'm actually the first time I'm remembering about this in years.
Yeah, me too. I'm pretty sure he sold it to somebody who didn't run it.
So I remember and you're going to smile when you hear the rest of the story. But I remember having the blockchain synced on my laptop. I remember having the addresses and sending it to him as like a test. And I sent him like the 50 Bitcoin, and he never got it. And he was like sitting next to me. And I guess we can't figure out if, like, I don't think he had the blockchain synced. But
right.
But nowadays, wouldn't your balance still show in the wallet if you're downloading Bitcoin QT? And most people don't realize that Bitcoin Core was called Bitcoin QT. And hey, Jeff, at what point and why did Bitcoin? I think I was in jail when this happened, but when did Bitcoin?
That's actually that's the modern retelling. The Bitcoin QT was the second version of the GUI.
Walk us through that.
The first version was the original was Windows only. And it was mostly sort of one big source file for all the blockchain handling,
yep,
and then another big source file or two for the GUI. And it was written in something nobody's ever heard of called WX widgets. And I think it was the current Bitcoin Core lead maintainer, Vladimir, rewrote it in Qt because Qt was a better GUI infrastructure, better GUI framework for the software. But yeah, it was the original was Windows only. It used this framework nobody ever heard of called WX Widgets. It was a big hairball of a source code from software engineers. We would look at it. We saw no unit tests or stress tests or any of the normal software engineering that you expect from a professional software project. My instant impression was it was just written by someone who is self-taught but very, very, very smart. That was sort of the first impression that you would get from downloading Bitcoin source code.
Why did he get changed to Bitcoin Core? When did that happen?
That was well after Satoshi left. It was always just Bitcoin, and one of the I think I may have unintentionally kicked off the whole Bitcoin Core thing in that in the early days Bitcoin was just CPU mined, and in the early days it was just this one Bitcoin.exe that you downloaded from Satoshi. That was the only thing that could do CPU mining.
I remember, yeah.
And they didn't have the fancy CPU miners, GPU miners, et cetera, that came along in 2010, 2011. And a lot of programmers were pestering Satoshi, hey, put in this special speed up for CPU mining on this special CPU. And another programmer would have another special speed up for a different type of hardware. And it all got kind of a pain in the butt. So Satoshi asked me to separate out the CPU miner from the rest of the Bitcoin source code. And I did that. I wrote the first CPU miner called, with a credible flair of imagination, CPU miner. And that got a big chunk of programmers off Satoshi's back and allowed them to pursue this parallel track mining.
Was Satoshi feeling overwhelmed with everything?
He was with it was overwhelmed with stuff that wasn't core. And so that's why I say I may have unintentionally kicked off the whole Bitcoin Core thing, is that we're peeling off some of the non-core pieces of the Bitcoin software. And so what is left naturally is Bitcoin Core.
And it makes sense from a technology perspective because you want to separate everything into layers, right? So if something breaks, then eventually you can separate it out. And I know this is like a terrible, terrible segue, Jeff, but I mean, since you brought up about the concept of changing layers and multiple layers, what do you think of, like, I guess, the future of the technology in specifically Bitcoin? We could talk about some of the other stuff later. And I know a lot of the other coins and tokens experiment with different things. But, kind of the direction that we're going is this building layers on top of Bitcoin and then having the core blockchain be almost like untouched. And so, like, if I don't know anything about technology and I just use, the analogy of what you just said, it sounds like that's the correct direction that we should be going. Is it? Do you think that's, from a technology perspective, do you think that that's the best way forward?
Well, it's a great question. I tend to shy away from a binary yes or no. Is this a great way forward? I try to play a little bit of it might not seem such from my online persona at times, but I really internally think of myself as a neutral engineer, neutral scientist, looking at the data and then making a determination. And if we, I think, look at the data, it is intentionally hard to change Bitcoin. And that's a good thing. That's resilience. That's anti-fragility. Another way to describe it is it's an asymmetric difficulty in changing or adding technologies. And again, that means it's resilient. That means it's resistant to bad changes. But on the negative side, it's more difficult to import new, possibly good changes. Now, the term from networking that I like to use is backbone. Is that one of my longstanding observations is that Bitcoin is the trunk or the root of an internet of chains. And sort of unpacking that, that means that if Bitcoin does not change at all, zero technological changes, it can and will continue to work just fine, and people will adapt around it. So that's part of answering your question. Now, what does adapt around it mean, right? Some of that is people just saying, "Oh, use Ethereum, use this other blockchain, and don't use Bitcoin." But Bitcoin has the most liquidity, the most buy-in across both companies, technologies, regulatory, legal, across all these domains. And so if you're doing it on the one hand, on the other hand, you've got, I could use Bitcoin and then build some other technology on top of it using Bitcoin as that backbone, or I could just use this totally other technology. Now, that's an A or B where you've got some established tech, Bitcoin, versus let me pick this other technology, a Tezos, an EOS, an ETH, whatever, pick your platform. And it's always going to be Bitcoin contrasted with that other guy. That just, naturally.
Well, that's why that term
when making
altcoin,
that comparison. Yeah, exactly.
Alternative to Bitcoin.
Exactly. And
it wasn't meant as a negative, though.
And economic choice. And that economic choice is, I can go with this totally other thing that's less established, but better for my use case. Or I could go with this thing that's not great for my use case, build on top of it a tech that is good for my use case. That's kind of what Rootstock is doing. That's kind of what Echo is doing.
So they're building layers.
Stored sidechains, Lightning Network. We call it layer 2, but it's really using the Bitcoin technology and expanding Bitcoin universe at the same time. And I don't pretend to have an answer to that.
But it utilizes Bitcoin security, right?
Yep.
So,
yep.
And that's the best. They're almost like these technologies are saying, like Lightning, for example, or whatever. They're saying, when you're on the Lightning, when you're using, for example, Liquid. Let's use Blockstream's example, Liquid. They tell you that this is a not as decentralized version of Bitcoin. It's a federation, but it utilizes the security of the Bitcoin blockchain, whereas like the core tech, and when you move back your Liquid, LBTC back into Bitcoin, back and forth, and you're holding it, it's utilizing the security of the Bitcoin blockchain, and for better or for worse. But Jeff, I want to ask you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that really presents like three models, what I'll call the stasis model, the Luke Jr. model, and the big block model. And somewhat controversially,
those are completely, can you almost put it into two I feel like it's like the Luke Jr. model, the big block model, and there's like the middle of the road, what we're doing now model, I feel like.
Yeah, it's again, with that asymmetric nature of change, is that we have to assume, for the sake of argument, that Bitcoin might never change. We might never increase or decrease that block size. And there is a scenario where Bitcoin works just fine in conjunction with these other layer 2 technologies in that scenario. Similarly, since we're in a constrained model, if you increase that constraint, and I'll call that the Luke Jr. model, decrease the block size, again, there are perfectly workable technologies that marry with that. And that creates kind of that Bitcoin Luke Jr. backbone. But Bitcoin keeps working. Bitcoin keeps ticking away. And then there's obviously decrease the constraints, increase the block throughput, transaction throughput model. And Bitcoin works in that scenario as well. So, it's somewhat controversial, if you consider SegWit2x and all this other stuff. But as a neutral engineer, a neutral scientist, you have to say there is a way forward for Bitcoin that's entirely viable on all paths. And that just blows everybody's mind.
It's very interesting. that you're able to give me and our listeners these perspectives from like a very neutral standpoint. And of course, listen, you're going to have people on like crypto Twitter and whatever claiming that you and I are not neutral. But, if you're listening to the show, it's nice to get like a technology perspective. So let me ask you another question that simply, and Jeff, this is interesting because I'm not asking you questions. A lot of these times, it's not like I'm asking you a question that I already know the answer to. A lot of times I simply like, what I like doing on the show is sometimes I don't understand things myself, and you're someone who could explain better. So here's a shot. Up until Vitalik announced Ethereum, up until that point, altcoins wasn't a negative thing. It wasn't a negative term, right? You alluded to it earlier. It was alternative to Bitcoin. And, if you look at the early Bitcoin talk forums and whatever, or forum.bitcoin, Namecoin, Litecoin, so many experimentations. Like, how many different coins did Charlie Lee, experiment with before Litecoin? There was two other
That's
ones that I
right.
could think of.
Yep.
So, I mean, there was experimentation. It was love. It was ideas. It was a thought process. And it was all these different experimentations. And yeah, maybe Bitcoin would never adopt them, but it was still fun. It wasn't scammy. And a lot of these tokens.
Retroactively, I call it the first ICO boom.
But these companies and these coins and tokens did raise money, like they did, but they weren't still seen as scammy. What was it about Ethereum that made that? I feel like until Ethereum launched, there was no tribalism. There was no. That was the beginning. I feel like when Ethereum was launched, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I feel like when Ethereum was announced, that was the first time that we saw the cracks of, tribalism and toxicity start to show.
I'm going to agree and disagree to a certain extent. The disagreement part would be that what I call the first altcoin wave, where you would make a photocopy of the Bitcoin source code, change all the strings to say Jeff Coin instead of Bitcoin, and you launched your own network. But there wasn't a raise associated with that. So you had, and that economic component, I think, in part answers your question, is that, when you're starting a Litecoin, what you do is you take the Bitcoin source code and you change the proof of work algorithm, you change a couple other metrics, and you launch it. But you didn't take in money to launch it. You obviously had, presumably a lot of Litecoin as it's getting issued, and you're putting that in your pocket, but you didn't take in money before the chain was launched. And with Ethereum, that was where they're taking in BTC and then in the future going to launch this network. And I think that that was really the point where investors' money was at risk versus it wasn't in that first ICO wave or first altcoin wave. That really made the big difference. That the tribalism was always there. I mean, you probably remember in the days of the Bitcoin Foundation, like any coin that's not Bitcoin is not a good coin was kind of the default thought.
Yes.
And but with Ethereum, when you're taking in money based on a promise, that is a new level. And I don't think it was a scam. I think they were very transparent. But if we're using the US SEC and CFTC as any guidelines, then they have said that, looking back, Ethereum was a security at one time. It's not anymore. It's now decentralized, et cetera. But if you take that logic, I think that they were kind of the SEC was kind of agreeing with those early Ethereum critics in that it was a fundraise. And that was the first fundraise. They obviously did well, but there was a lot of risk and there was a lot of promises that, we've seen in other non-Ethereum platforms turn out to be scams. So that's that. Ethereum took it to a new level by collecting BTC to launch their coin, which was something that the first wave of altcoins didn't do.
I'm so honored that Untold Stories is sponsored by eToro. eToro is the smartest crypto trading platform and one of the largest in the world with over $1 trillion in trading volume per year. What I really love about eToro is that the CEO has been around the Bitcoin space since 2012, so they really put their money where their mouths are. US customers, myself included, we can trade the most popular crypto assets, in fact, almost all of the ones that you want to trade, with low but transparent fees. So you actually know what you're paying for everything. And that's really important. So if you're not ready to trade yet, you can practice building your portfolio with the eToro $100,000 virtual trading feature. So you can create this whole portfolio without trading with any real money to see how you'll do. And you could learn all the different ins and outs without using any real money yet. And then once you're comfortable, you can enter the market and start buying and selling crypto for real. Best of all, one of my favorite features is that you can connect with 11 million other eToro traders in the world, myself included. And we can talk trading, charts, and all things crypto. So listen, head on over to eToro.com. Links are in the show notes, and build your crypto portfolio the smart way. You know, you don't sound like jaded. Well, because I talk to people and, you have people that have been involved a very long time get jaded. But I guess
I've just always been the same level of jaded.
But Jeff, I could think of times where you became like very unfairly, Segwit 2X is a great example. You became like the person that the other side unfairly was attacking. But
yeah, my role is to receive arrows in the back.
But you take it very well. And I'm not saying that to compliment you. I'm saying that as an observation. I don't take it well, and that's why I just don't say anything. Obviously, prison helped me like train. By the way, you want to hear a funny analogy? So you, and this goes to my question. You told me in an email, you said to me, I tend to roll my eyes at a lot of the hyperbole tossed about in the block size debates, and I kind of I'm smiling because I kind of get it, because like you've been through, before Bitcoin, you've been through some crazy shit with CNN and the internet, but also with Linux, and you've seen worse. You've seen like worse. You were telling me that, you think crypto Twitter is bad now. You don't understand what it was like back then when we were trying to launch Linux. And so the funny analogy is that I get it, because I was very bad at dealing with trolls, and then I went to prison, and then because where I was, there are there's a lot less violence, but people still have the need. In prison, you have 500 inmates who are just angry at life every day. So, but because where I was is a better prison than where you could have ended up, there's a lot less violence, but you still have people that need to take aggression out on each other. So you have an immense amount of passive aggressiveness and trolling. Oh my God, I feel like trolling was invented in prison. Every day, constantly, in person too, to your face.
Yeah.
So when I got out and I saw what was going on with this whole like scaling Bitcoin and Segwit 2X, I'm like, guys, I think I told Samson on the show, I'm like, Samson, like, I love you, but like, you got nothing on the trolls in prison. You got nothing. Those guys are pros. I'm still an amateur. Like, being called a troll from you is flattering, Samson, but like, and I told him that, I said, like, those guys in jail, like, oh my God, none of us would survive a day of their trolling. But you get that, right? Because you've been through, what were some debates that people had on the early Linux chats? Was it same thing, like block sizes? What type of stuff were people arguing about in those years?
Yeah, I like to say that I imported my flame retardant asbestos suit from Linux, We had a very salty email list. Most of the communications in the Linux kernel were over email. And, what your listeners may not appreciate, this one piece of software, the Linux kernel, it's in everything. It's in every Android phone, every computer, and every data center, just about traffic lights, cars. This one piece of software, it powers, literally billions of computers. And with that kind of impact, it's a very big deal when, say, China releases Red Flag Linux, which is their open source take on Linux. But back in the early 90s, that was a big deal. Are the communists coming? Are they, infecting our computers? What are they doing? And you have...
Wait, they called it Red?
Red Flag Linux.
I mean, they couldn't have played on that stereotype.
as a result, the engineering mailing list, they were, your code is just shit. Why are you even alive? Why don't you just go away and die rather than submit the software change? It was harsh for, obviously nowhere near prison, but it was harsh, engineer to engineer. We even had meetings about, is our environment sufficiently toxic that we're chasing away other programmers? So, coming to Bitcoin, it was, to me as a, 40-something person, to me it was like, oh, you little kids, you were just so microtoxic. It's cute. Come back to me in 5 years.
That's a great term. I love that, microtoxic.
So, yeah, it was not a big deal at all. And you can see that people are just either playing to their audience or, trying to push the needle in a particular direction. But, major life lesson, something that people don't get even today, is that a troll is not looking for the truth. They're not looking for, truth to be received and educated. They're looking to provoke a reaction, whatever that reaction is. And
any reaction,
exactly.
They win.
And so the troll is in control when they make you do something. And so obviously, logically, the way to not give them their satisfaction, to disempower the troll, is not give them what they're looking for, is that reaction, that, explosion, or, more subtly, sometimes trolls, and I don't know if I can imagine this level in prison, is people are trying to trigger you to do some action, so that they don't, get in trouble. You're the one who is actually undertaking that action, but they triggered it by, that particular troll. So people just don't get this sort of chessboard mentality of, the purpose of a troll is to generate that reaction. And the way to disarm them is to not give them that reaction.
I'll give you an example about something that I saw happen literally, like in a cell next door to, in a cube next door to me. Was this guy kept calling his wife or girlfriend or something, and she wasn't answering. And then, so he was getting trolled a lot. They were like, yeah, she left you, blah, blah, blah. She's cheating on you. And, no one wants to hear that. So of course, this guy, because you only have 10 minutes a day worth of minutes to call, he, got a contraband cell phone and called his wife or whatever. And of course she answered, and there was no issue. He talked to her, and he was trolled. So, but then what happened was, because of that, next time he got on the prison phone with her, he mentioned the fact that they spoke on a cell phone recently. It slipped, and those calls are being monitored. He ended up getting sent to solitary confinement.
Yep.
Because he allowed the trolls to troll him. So it could lead to very negative things. I mean, you could get sent to solitary confinement. I mean, from allowing someone to get in your head. And we see with crypto Twitter, it could happen a lot worse. But I think, like, for better or for worse, it's important to have, I'd rather have an industry that trolls each other and says things that need to be said and calls each other out, even if it's in a negative way, than being in an industry like, for example, I can't think of an example, but an industry where they just don't, it's just one big echo chamber.
It is. It absolutely is.
So, you mentioned SegWit2x before, and you said a quote somewhere in my research, and I want to read it off to you. You said, this is open source, and it's just part of the game. People have different opinions, and it's very human, very social, and inevitably a political process. And I want to highlight political process. People want Bitcoin to be this pure, abstract software entity, but realists will observe that Bitcoin is an approximation of that. This is a very brilliant quote. Ultimately, Bitcoin's network is a social network, and we have to have social consensus. So reading that quote is brilliant, and I agree with it, and it's very smart. However, if you remember SegWit2x, and the concept behind SegWit2x is here you have two camps fighting each other. So how do we have a political solution to a development issue? And sounds right. And that's ultimately what I felt like a majority of the community cared about with that. But then you had this like very small vocal minority who went out there and claimed that you can't have a development solution. You can't have a political solution to a development problem. You need to have a development solution to a development problem. Now, I don't know how to respond to that because I'm not a developer, but you are. You're a developer. How would you respond to that?
Well, ultimately, Bitcoin is a social network, and I think you can't get around that. And if, as the discussion proved out, it was getting deep into really the what is Bitcoin? Is it a payment network? Is it a store of value, a medium of exchange? All of these things that certainly economists, crypto economist nerds love to debate, but all of that is very much non-technical. And that is in the realm of which social groups want this use case or that use case. Which businesses were built on the assumption that the blockchain would continue to increase throughput versus pick an alternate path of not increased throughput at the core layer. And so you ultimately, I always try to analyze from an economics and incentives level. Is at that time in 2017, you had a number of businesses which had looked at the early, Bitcoin plan, as it were, which the original plan was to continue to increase the block size. And they built businesses with that perhaps implicit assumption in mind. They invested money, economics, time, blood, sweat, tears into that plan or that assumption. And then when things go in a different direction, they're caught in a lurch. Depending on each business, depends on how much they're caught. But you have these embedded economic solutions that is very much in the non-technical realm. On the technical side, the open source process, again, importing from the Linux days, it's, at the very basic level for your audience, what is open source? Open source, I like to describe it, is a lot like the scientific process in biology or chemistry, where one scientist or a software engineer, in this case, they develop something. What their next step is peer review. They have to share their findings or their software with other peers that review it, test it, evaluate it, and then and only then is it published. And open source is similar in that we software engineers, we propose changes, we evaluate them, debate them, etc. Sometimes changes are obvious and have wide consensus and they go in immediately. And sometimes changes are very contentious and they don't have consensus and they either don't go in for a long time or never go in. And I call that entire process sort of we air our dirty laundry in public. Is another part of open source is just that transparency. To be open, you have to make these source code changes visible to everyone in the entire world.
And that's why I didn't agree with that statement, because up until that debate, let's call it, up until that fork, no, I don't like to use the word fork, up until that segment of our crypto history, everything was done with a political problem. Every solution was a political solution to a development problem. They just weren't contested. So even a simple thing like there's a spelling error and you go on GitHub and like you say, you have to publicly bring out the error. You have to, and even Satoshi was rejecting some of your solutions because you felt this solution was a better solution than someone else's solution. That is the basis of you have solutions and you talk about it and you create social consensus and you create. But I guess so. I remember I mentioned, Jeff, before that you weren't jaded, and you're probably wondering why I said that. So, dude, like when I do research for this show, I spend a lot of time doing it, and I read a Reddit post that you made, and it was like the day before scaling Bitcoin in Hong Kong in 2015. It was like the day before, and you were excited about this event. So for those who don't know, and I wasn't there, but I was in prison, but scaling Bitcoin probably was the single most important event in Hong Kong. And literally it's called Scaling Bitcoin because it was a culmination of everyone from all sides. I mean, you had the Roger Veers, you had the Bloq streams, you had all sides supposed to meet at this event to talk about a social and political solution, right? And
yep.
you were excited about this, Jeff. I was reading your post. You were like, we're gonna talk there. We're gonna come up with a solution. I'm excited. And you were so unjaded, and you were so that you weren't even like. I remember in that post, you weren't giving people like specifics about your thoughts because you wanted to do it at this event. What changed at that event? Like, what happened, dude? I wasn't there. What happened? Like, why did things spiral out of control? Up until that point, it seems like we were such a great example of an industry that when you have things that are contentious and you're talking about billions of dollars, we can all get together and work it out, even if everyone has different business interests. What happened? What did I miss?
Well, I think that's where it started to sort of solidify into the big blocker, not big blocker, couple camps. It was less about technical solutions and became more about who's in control and how is it controlled, and there were a lot of conspiracy theories in the room. I don't traffic in conspiracy theories at all, so they kind of frustrate me. But, what if, China is secretly controlling Bitcoin, or what if this is a vector for the United States government secretly controlling Bitcoin, and sort of the stuff that I roll my eyes at, but it, taking the broad view is really where there was more of a solidification into the yes, we need to follow this Satoshi upgrade path versus no, we shouldn't follow that upgrade path, and that became a sorting function or a sorting hat for the Harry Potter fans to.
Who created the camps? I never figured this out. Was the big blocker, small blocker camps, like, was that created by someone on Reddit? I'm not asking for a specific answer, I guess. Was it created,
I think it was just
or
a sorting function? There's no who
so the
that
market,
comes to
it was
mind,
created by the market. Okay.
There, more people apply energy on one side versus the other, and then sort of a natural magnetism occurs after that.
I love that because that's like the best. I'm going to add that. So whenever I tell people that markets are efficient when we allow them to be, when we allow them to be is super important because sometimes it takes longer than we want it to take. And that's when you have governments or companies, come in with their heavy hand instead of let software and markets to kind of govern themselves. But that's a great addition to the point, what you just said. And I'm going to use that where you said that both, people will put different energies to different solutions, and whichever, the market will, the energy that's greater on one side is the one that'll ultimately come out. And it almost like goes into physics, right? Because energy can never be created or destroyed, only transferred. So it's really interesting that how you brought that all together just now. I didn't know you were a physicist.
No, I'm just a long now philosopher. I always try to take the 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year view, and so I tend to see myself as less jaded and more just I look at the long view. My family's been involved, for example, in foreign policy, like State Department type stuff. And so I'm always, from literally the age of 6 or 8, I grew up with politics at a nation state level, geopolitics, and this nation wants this nation wants that. And it's a 20-year freaking process to get there. And maybe we'll never get there. So Bitcoin just sort of resurfaces on maybe a libertarian scale that, the geopolitics, nation state politics type stuff where, the big issues, they never really get solved. You make some minor progress at the edges, but mostly things continue mostly the way they are. And, you'll have people on one side shaking their fist at the status quo and people on the other side embracing the status quo and living within it. And, Bitcoin is just more in that same vein. It's the new geopolitics.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And it's probably, I wonder if we get Henry Kissinger in here to start.
I think I failed as being Henry Kissinger of crypto.
So do you have any regret? You've given away over 15,000 Bitcoin you've given away for various integrations, mining software, open source help, for the betterment of Bitcoin itself and for crypto. Do you regret that? Do you have any regrets? I should not preclude that statement with the question of do you have any regrets?
Well, no, it's a frequently asked question is, right along with are you Satoshi, which is no, certainly I wish I had held on to more of that than I did. But at the time, it was very important as a sort of amateur economist and market player that not only did I pay with Bitcoin to enhance the Bitcoin industry, but I bought those Bitcoin on the market with US dollars to fully exercise the system. So I paid with fiat, transferred to Bitcoin, and then paid the developers in Bitcoin. And each one of those steps in the early days of Bitcoin, it was very important. I was, amusingly, transferring cash to Jed McCaleb's PayPal account because I was buying on Mt. Gox in those early days. And it's just so important when you're building a monetary system. I could see in those days, it's so important to use the money. We call it in the software industry dog fooding, eating your own dog food, which means using your own products. It's not enough to work on this or that aspect of a decentralized currency. You've got to get out in the field and use it. You've got to pay your contractor, your plumber, your electrician in Bitcoin to really see what it means in the real world. And sort of getting back to that, the sci-fi background is if, as I hope we get to that place where we're all living in the crypto economy and Bitcoin is a world player alongside the US dollar, the renminbi, stuff like that. If we're going to get there, we have to use it. And that was the thought in 2010 is I can't just get out there and hack software and send patches to Satoshi. I've got to get out there in the real world, pound pavement in Atlanta, and get people using it. That was kind of the genesis of helping to work with BitPay. That was the genesis of those developer bounties. Is you got to pay it in Bitcoin.
You gotta, you have almost like a feeling or there's almost like a moral imperative that if you're involved in this technology so early on, you're not only fighting for your company or you as an individual, you're also trying to grow the industry as a whole. And so thank you for that. But you mentioned Satoshi again, and you brought up another conversation that I was thinking about the other day. It's you probably have your own theory on why Satoshi left and whether that was good or bad for the industry. And that's been like hotly debated so many times. So I guess the question is, you know Vitalik well, you've roomed with him. You're very familiar with Ethereum. Do you have like an opinion on Vitalik and his relationship to Ethereum? Do you think Vitalik has his own thought process on, hey, maybe I shouldn't have done this publicly and I should have done it anonymously like Satoshi? Have you ever had those type of conversations or thought processes?
Yeah, and there's kind of the strengths and weaknesses on both sides there. Is that Bitcoin, I think the greatest thing that Satoshi did was, or the greatest two things was be anonymous and then disappear. And that really, as I mentioned earlier, in the early days, the anonymity forced us to look at the code and think about the real issues and not about the personality. And obviously, this was before crypto Twitter and stuff like that. And so his anonymity really forced us to make it all about merit, make it all about the logic of the argument, not the force of the personality. And that's the way it should be. And then disappearing is with whatever the cause of the disappearance. With Satoshi disappearing again, that forces the community to develop its own governance or lack thereof. Processes, examine all these aspects of the system because the founder isn't around anymore. And so what's the flip side of that is that if you're a Vitalik and Ethereum, it's easier to get stuff done. And we see that with, as we record this a couple days ago was the Istanbul hard fork of Ethereum.
Yes.
They've added zero knowledge proofs and a bunch of other features to that. And so competitively with the founders like Vitalik being around, and, this is an open question. I don't have an answer. Maybe Ethereum is more competitive because it can add more features more quickly. It can adapt. Another thing along with Bitcoin is the social network. I like to say that Bitcoin is an organism, an evolving organism. And Ethereum is as well. So is Ethereum evolving more quickly, more competitively? Open question. But on the same token, Bitcoin is, and I can use my own experience as a counterexample, as the trolls on crypto Twitter do, is the failure of SegWit a highlight of resilience and anti-fragility? And I think, again, being neutral, a neutral evaluation, the answer is yes. And so which model is better? And again, I don't have an answer for that, but it's definitely Satoshi leaving early and being anonymous set Bitcoin up for a certain culture and a certain meritocratic examination of the changes that are going in, versus on Ethereum, you might have, I'm not placing, any particular blame on any one person,
of
but
course,
you might have some intellectual laziness of, Vitalik and the core devs said it's okay, so it's okay. And
interesting thought process.
That sort of turns off that meritocratic evaluation of technology and sort of shortcuts, personality. He's a good personality, good person, so it must be a good technology. And I think that there's, having a founder around is helps you move faster, but it also creates this sort of intellectual laziness where you evaluate changes less rigorously.
That's a very interesting thought process. I had never really thought about that before. However, if you take that to the extreme, don't you get like the whole Satoshi vision camp now, like the religious fundamentalist type of thing?
Absolutely. It's blockchain is as a libertarian, I love looking at it from a high level and thinking that blockchain is a big bag of governance experiments. And you've got,
Dude, you're so right.
The EOS model of 21, this consortium of 21 block producers. You've got Bitcoin, where it's a let's fight it out. You've got Tezos, where it's a let's vote on the governance. but is that vote gamed? No system is perfect. Every system is an experiment. And that's why I don't feel I get jaded. Is I just love watching all this play out every day, because no one has a right answer. So no one knows, which camp is going to ultimately succeed.
What are you working on with Bloq now? So you're on the cutting edge, and things, when we talk about things that you've worked on in hindsight, they're exciting. So now you've been doing kind of two things. You founded and been working with Bloq for 4 years. You've launched your own chains, and I want to ask you about them. And you're still working on space. You're still trying to build the physical, virtual, and financial infrastructure to enable like space exploration and settlement. I mean, that's like a long-term thing, but you've been doing that for 3 years at Dunvegan Space Systems. What are you working on? Like, what's going on internally at those two companies?
So I like to think of Bloq as the umbrella, and a lot of those efforts fall under that. So real quickly, we have two business units at Bloq. One of them is the enterprise business unit, where we work with customers like Discover or PricewaterhouseCoopers or Fidelity, real Fortune 50 type customers. And we help them understand, digest, et cetera, Bitcoin, blockchain, public networks, how to best engage with those, that sort of thing. And we just most recently released Block.Cloud. You can open up your browser and go to Block.Cloud.
I want to check it out right now.
And that's our kind of Amazon AWS for blockchain, or Google Cloud for blockchain platform. Where after 10 years in the industry, I still am frustrated by the difficulty at which developers have to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to build blockchain apps. I wanted to make it a swipe a credit card and start building type experience, where you don't even need a crypto wallet. You don't even need to hold tokens to interact with networks like Ethereum or Coin or Filecoin or this, that, and the other. Is for a dev, you just need an API and some JSON format responses, and you're good to go. And that's Block.Cloud. Is what is the easiest way I was trying to solve for to bring more developers into the space for any blockchain. If you want to be a Bitcoin developer, I want you to come to Block.Cloud first. If you want to be an Ethereum developer, I want you to come to Block.Cloud first. Very coin neutral, multi-coin, multi-network type approach. And so that's the enterprise side. And we just launched Block.Cloud in late August. Very excited about that. We're engaging with a bunch of different networks. We've just closed the deal with Etsy Labs to bring Etsy on board alongside BTC and ETH and several others. So very excited about that. The other side is Block Labs, which is kind of a Bell Labs or a Xerox PARC innovation shop. And that's where we do the moonshots, the crazy stuff that it's wildly innovative, but man, maybe it's a little bit too risky for the Fortune 500 enterprises. So we have Dunvegan Space Systems got folded into a new effort called Space Chain, spacechain.com. They've launched 2 satellites with quantum and Ethereum node technology on board as flight tests. We launched a coin on top of Ethereum called Metronome, which is in fitting with my sort of super long-term vision. It's a coin that's designed to survive the death of a blockchain, which is pretty unique as of this writing. And so if you want to, the theory is if you want to hold, there's this kind of autonomous Federal Reserve that's sitting there backing you up, keeping it running, even if the plumbing underneath, the infrastructure underneath fails. And then we're also looking at some other not yet announced projects in the machine learning and blockchain space, the layer 2 space, like payment networks and that sort of thing, kind of Lightning or Raiden type stuff. So that's our innovation shop, where we do stuff that's too risky, dangerous, or too exciting for enterprise.
Jeff Garzik, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think that our listeners are probably saying to themselves, okay, I know this Garzik guy. I didn't know what he's been doing, and I kind of want to follow his cool shit for the future. So I know we made fun of crypto Twitter a lot on the show, but how can people follow you, your writings, your work, your projects, your companies? How can people do that and keep in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest is at Garzik on Twitter. It's not just company announcements and stuff. I get into politics and open source activism and free speech activism. So it's a pretty high volume Twitter, but that's the best way. Bloq.com is
and that's with a Q.
corporate avenue. Bloq.com.
What a great name!
You go.
You got the best company name. It's literally the best name.
And it's so easy to type into a browser or an email address. I love it.
It's great. Jeff, thank you so much. Oh, and it starts with a B too, which is great because like for being in phone books, we don't use phone books anymore. So my friend started a company like 30 years ago or 40. He's been doing it 30 years, jewelry store. And the name of his company is like, it's A dot and then the name of the store and like and son. And and so I'm like, what's the A dot? Like, and then it's like the company name. And he said for the phone book, because I was, A dot, I was the first in the phone book. Brilliant. Guy's doing it for 30 years. He's a good friend of mine.
I love little hacks like that.
Yeah. Jeff, thank you again so much. And I'll see you in Atlanta in a few weeks. I'm excited.
Yeah, you're always welcome. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Charlie.
I love it. I'll talk to you later.
All right, take care.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. New episodes of Untold Stories are released every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. EST on untoldstories.com, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Untold Stories is produced by Jason Yanowitz, Michael Ippolito, Reed Hannaford, and Riley Silbert of Blockworks Group. Our account executives are Gina DeFelice and Julie Muroff. Our content is written by Kathy Zolo, Ronnie Tishner, and Scott Offord. Special thanks to Wayne Dallaire from Jump Dog Audio Productions. And of course, I'm your host, Charlie Shrem. You can follow me on Twitter at Charlie Shrem to continue the conversation. Send me some messages, feedback, or anything you want to say. And remember, please give some love to my sponsors, and I'll see you next week. Remember, strength in numbers and information is power.